Hi all. I'm going to talk to you about the Brian Williams scandal today, and along the way I'll give you a couple of helpful hints about things coming up in the class. So you can see over on this side of the screen, this is my itinerary for the meeting today. So quite a bit of stuff to get through, and I'm going to try to talk fairly quickly so this doesn't turn into a really long video. So if you have any questions afterwards, just let me know. But some of this stuff is very timely and relevant to the things we've been talking about the last couple weeks in the class, and I hope that it resonates with what you've been doing on your assignments and your course materials. But the first thing is to talk about why this matters. And you all know by now, I hope, who Brian Williams is. If you've been paying attention to the news, he's the NBC nightly news anchor. And he's also the person that NBC has sent to the Olympics to cover the Olympics. He's quite the face of NBC. So it matters because NBC is the most watched news show of all the network news shows. And I'm not including the cable networks in this case. I'm talking about the news shows that air on the broadcast stations. And they generally have more than 10 million viewers a night. So that's a lot of people who are watching Brian Williams. What are the ethical values at stake? The same ones we've been talking about in the class so far. There's questions of integrity, credibility, trust, accuracy, and money, which isn't really an ethical value, but it is what's at stake in this. Consequences that we're looking at, we have, of course, damage to Brian Williams' career and his credibility, but we also have damage to the NBC News institution. And if you know anything about how the political economy or how the media works, the different networks have different things that are their kind of cash cows. And so some places they rely more on their entertainment television, some stations broadcast stations rely more on daytime programming like talk shows. NBC has relied on their news programming to carry the brunt of their financial infrastructure. So this is a really big deal to NBC News. This is also raising questions about okay, Brian Williams did this, what other anchor people are out there who may be slipping or telling half-truths or untruths. So it's raising questions for the other network news anchors. It's raising questions from the news outlet, at the news outlet level, like, okay, so is this indicative of what NBC News is like? Is this just Brian Williams, or is this NBC News? What can we say about Fox News? What can we say about CBS News? What can we say about MSNBC? Journalism as a whole takes a blow. So the basic bottom line for why this matters is this. There's a loss of trust, which leads to a loss of viewers, which leads to loss of revenue. Because in the media industry right now, number of viewers and quality of viewers, because not all viewers are the same quality of viewers equals revenue. And the news programming attracts the kind of viewers that equals revenue, because advertisers want to promote their products to that group. Okay, so I pulled some quotes from recent news stories that I thought were good ones that encapsulate what this thing is all about and why it is making it such a big deal. So the first couple are from an AP report, and I'm just going to read it. NBC Chief Executive Steve Burke said Tuesday that Williams jeopardized the trust he has built up with viewers during his decade as the network's lead anchor. So there we have another news source talking about how this is damaging Williams' personal trust, the trust that people have in Williams as the news anchor. NBC News President Deborah Turnus said the review of Williams' work by NBC's investigative editor, Richard Esposito, together with the network's general counsel, is continuing. So, you've seen this recently. We had this on our quiz question not too long ago about the investigations with the Muslim charities and how many instances of fabrication and plagiarism were turned up in that case. this is another one where, okay, so now they're looking at all of Williams' work, not just this one story. They're digging in to see what else might be incorrect, misstated, misspoken, lies. We'll see. Next one is from the New York Times. But for NBC, it was about protecting the integrity of its news operation, once called the crown jewel of the company. So this is a statement that New York Times was saying about why they went ahead and suspended BrianWilliams, because they are protecting the integrity of their news operation. It's a big deal. Okay, next is from The Guardian. So our Brits, let's get what their perspective on this. All this matters because in an increasingly fractured media landscape, it is becoming more and more difficult to know which news sources you can trust. And, as Thomas Jefferson once said, an informed citizenry is at the heart of a dynamic democracy, which is the public interest, which is what we've been talking about since the beginning of the class. Some on social media are describing Williams as a sacrificial lamb, taking the fall for more widely unreliable media, maybe. The irony is that in striving for credibility, Williams could end up with none at all. So what they are saying with this last sentence is that what BrianWilliams might have been doing in saying that he was on the helicopter that got shut down is he might have been trying to establish his credibility. He was there, he was involved in the incident, he was reporting from the front lines, therefore he should know what he's talking about. And viewers should then trust him to be telling them the truth. So what they are saying now is that if that's what Williams was doing, what Williams might end up doing is damaging his credibility, which obviously that's what he has done, rather than increasing his credibility. Okay, next one. This is from a Washington Post blog. To the extent that the job is more than merely reading words off a teleprompter, it is to be the institutional voice of trust and reason, reassuring in a crisis, the ultimate reliable narrator. When issues of trustworthiness become a distraction, the anchor loses his credibility and therefore his perch. So, we're talking about now how important this is one news organization talking about another news organization, so it's not necessarily reflective of all the public views about how credible the news are. But they're saying that when we have such a prominent person who's now called into public question whether or not he's been slipping half-truths past us, it calls into question the institutional voice of trust and reason. So that's a pretty big, high level, not low level, that's a high level degree of trust and integrity. And finally, this puts it right straight to the point from the same Washington Post blog. Journalists come to the job with only their credibility to offer. And that's exactly right. That is why we talk about this kind of stuff. We will talk about it all throughout this class. We've already been talking about it quite a bit. In another couple weeks, we're going to learn about a hall of shame of journalists who've destroyed their own credibility and called into question the credibility of the whole profession. And we'll see how the profession has adjusted because of those problems. So that is absolutely true. If you are a journalism major looking to go into journalism as a career, or you want to change your career path to be involved in journalism, all you have as a journalist is credibility. And once your credibility is called into question, your ability to be a journalist is also called into question. And in this, I'm talking about the news media. I'm not talking about sports. I'm not talking about entertainment. I'm not talking about travel. I'm not talking about things that are kind of on the edge of journalism. I'm talking about the hard news journalism. It's all about credibility and honest and accuracy and trust and integrity. Okay, so a brief timeline of what happened in case you haven't been following this. The incident actually happened in 2003, and there were 4 helicopters involved. There were 2 helicopters flying in the first wave, and then BrianWilliams was on one of the 2 helicopters that were in the second wave. And they were pretty close together, but not super tight close together. And what happened was the helicopters in the first wave took on fire and ended up in a firefight, and they are the ones who got hit with a grenade and crash landed, that sort of thing. Not BrianWilliams' helicopter. He was not on either of the helicopters that had those problems. So the first time he told this story was right after the incident in 2003, and it was on NBC Nightly News. He was in Iraq, reporting from Iraq as the reporter on the ground over there. And so that's when he first told the story. And in that story, he didn't embellish. He didn't. He basically said what really happened, which was that they saw the helicopters up ahead in trouble, and it was a bumpy landing, and that, so he didn't embellish it at that point. When things first started coming to light that we know of that he embellished it was the first time was March 2013 when he showed up on Letterman and he talked about what happened on the helicopter, and in that one he said that he was in a helicopter that was hit. So that's the first time that we know of. And then in January 2015 he told this story again when he was the nightly news anchor, and the words that he used was his helicopter was forced down. So you can see it evolving, far from the truth. And then later in January of this year, he attended a tribute at a Rangers game with the pilot of the helicopter that got shot down, and this was like a big deal. They made a big deal out of it, and ceremony and pomp and circumstance, and the two of them, BrianWilliams and the pilot, stood up and hugged each other, and they made a big fuss about it. Well, shortly after that, the other people military folks who were on the helicopters, both the ones that were taken down and the ones that weren't, started coming forward and saying, this is not right. There's something fishy in River City. So February 4th is when the Stars and Stripes newspaper, which is the one for the military, broke the story that what Williams' account wasn't true. And they had people who were interviewed who were telling the real story. Williams knew about this. He wrote an apology that was printed in their paper, and he posted it on his Facebook page. Then that night, when he was on the nightly news, he addressed it verbally, through his broadcast position to the rest of the world who was watching. And then lots of craziness and speculation and rampant social media activity and posts on newspapers and blogs later. February 11th, just yesterday, it was announced that NBC was going to suspend him without pay for 6 months. Okay, so that's fine, except that this is technically a fireable offense. So, yeah, he's been suspended without pay for 6 months, but he hasn't been fired, so we're going to have to keep our eyes on this and see what's going to happen down the road. The investigation is still ongoing, as we saw in the quote up ahead, and is the investigative editor. The review is continuing. So let's talk about the issues. Okay, I'm jokingly calling this Conflategate. Why not? Because it's timely. But he used the words when he was apologizing that he conflated instances and put himself in the wrong place at the wrong time, being shot down. But if you stop and think about that, how could he possibly confuse being shot down in a helicopter with not being shot down in a helicopter? That's like saying you were driving in your car and you got in an accident on the highway, but you never got in an accident on the highway. I mean, getting shot down in a helicopter is a pretty traumatic activity. So that's weird, and there's a lot of questions about that. Nobody understands right now what happened or why he said what he said. There's a lot of speculation, but there's no explanation for that. And there's all kinds of stuff. I'm going to skip down here, and I'll come back up to these articles in a second. But these are the kinds of words that are being thrown around. People are talking about whether he was doing this in a self-promotional manner versus other people who kind of tell tall tales in a way of being self-deprecating. So they're saying that he was actually trying to buff himself up and make himself look better in the public eye by telling the story, which has a little bit of a shady undertone to it. Appropriation is being thrown around, meaning that maybe he heard this story from somebody else and he accidentally or somehow it got muddled around in his brain and he took that story on to be his own story by accident without any malice behind it. That happens. It does happen. So it's possible. There's this notion of false memories, which is similar to appropriation, but maybe he was so traumatized by being in a scary incident in a helicopter where, you know, people around him were taking fire, and it was really a really weird, tragic, scary situation, that maybe in his mind over the years it started to seem like or feel like he was shot down. So that's possible. In psychological terms, both appropriation and false memories are possible. Some people are going so far as to say it was a deliberate misstatement and that it was a lie. So those are obviously people on the far end of the spectrum who are most critical of BrianWilliams. But these are all the kinds of terms that people are using now to describe the situation. Okay, so going back to Conflategate, I have a couple of articles that I wanted to show you. One is by The Guardian and one is from Duluth. So here's the one from The Guardian. So this is, I always like to look at news outlets from other countries when something happens, because it's really interesting to see how other countries report our news and the spin that they put on things. And so this is from The Guardian, and the author is Clive Myrie. And excuse me, what I thought it was interesting about this is that here Clive is telling the story about that is very similar to Brian's. He was actually he was in Iraq covering the war at the same time BrianWilliams was there. And he was on helicopters during the intense fighting that happened. And he was involved in a very similar accident to, a very similar incident, not accident, incident to what BrianWilliams described. But he actually was involved in it. And what he is saying is that the Chinook helicopter that was in front of them was the one that was attacked, and so it bled over to his helicopter because he was flying close by, and his helicopter had to move over and circle and try to stay out of the debris that was flying around and the rotors that were flying around as the helicopter that got hit spun out of control. So you can see how that would be pretty scary and pretty traumatic. It certainly would be for me. And here he says it was scary and stomach-churning stuff. So he was in a very similar situation, and he remembers it correctly. So the question he's asking is, why doesn't BrianWilliams remember it correctly? And he doesn't really say anything that is important. It's the same old stuff that everybody else is saying. But I bring this to your attention because here is another news anchor in a very similar position who experienced a very similar situation, who is not conflating or appropriating or bringing to light false memories or making deliberate distortional, misstatements. So here is somebody who's got more credibility because he's believable and he hasn't been blowing things out of proportion. Okay, so that's one. And then the other one I wanted to bring to your attention is this is from the Duluth News Tribune, which is a small outlet, but here's the pilot who was on BrianWilliams' flight. So he is now in the middle of the media storm with this, and he's been coming out and speaking about what actually happened. And in this article, he tells he talks about it. He tells the story of what happened. So in this article, you can see that you can see what really happened, and then you can kind of compare it to what BrianWilliams said. So I can send these links out later, but he's actually, I point this out, I hope he gets a second chance, he's actually very forgiving of this, and he's not pointing fingers and blaming, he's not angry, which is an interesting response. So basically he's saying he was on the helicopter with Williams, and they were back 15 or 20 minutes behind the first two helicopters, and the first two helicopters are the ones that got attacked. And they heard it, they saw it happening, and they saw one of the other helicopters drop, and then they had to fly in circles to avoid getting entangled in the mess of the aftermath of one of the helicopters getting shot down. So that's the truth of what happened if you believe Kelly as a credible source. So this is another interesting way to look at the Brian Williams story, is to read what other people who were involved in that exact incident are saying about the situation, and then you can compare the two cases. Okay, so the next thing is spillover. So we started with Conflategate, with the helicopter, the issues with the helicopter being shot down, and now we have actually, it's come to light that he may have reported inaccuracies during his time in Hurricane Katrina, and then there's some other thing out there about whether or not he rescued puppies when he was a teenager that he said he did, and maybe he didn't, I don't know. But the stuff with Hurricane Katrina is obviously important because that's a highly visible news story. There was tons of reporting on that. There's tons of stories that you can compare with his. There are lots of reporters who were in the same place that he was at the same time that he was. So there's going to be a lot of places where you can look and see what he said versus what actually happened according to other people's reports. So while NBC is investigating this, they're going to be looking at all of that, and they're going to be trying to verify the things that he said and see just how truthful he has been in the past in the other stories that he's written. So here's a place where I'm going to give you a hint for your upcoming projects. You have 2 plus the final project, so 3 altogether, where you're going to need to go out and find an article, a news story that you can do, you can use for an activity. And I'm going to show you how you can go about doing that easily. So I've got a browser up with Google, and I did a basic search for Brian Williams NBC News, and I clicked on the News tab, not the Web tab, because that's going to be all kinds of random stuff. But if you click on the News tab, it takes you to news stories. So the only thing that's listed in here are news stories. So this will take you to, if you're searching for something for one of the Media Watch assignments that are coming up soon, use Google News as the place where you go to find your articles, and use different search terms. It's going to save yourself so much time and so many headaches if you do it this way. People do it the other way. People will go through and scan the front page of the New York Times, or scan through their local newspaper, or kind of do things that way, which is fine if you want to go about it that way. But seriously, use Google News. That's really the way to go. And a second tip with that is here, the ones that are up at the top are the biggest stories involved with this. So within this whole search string, Brian Williams NBC News, there's going to be all kinds of little sub-stories and different directions that people took. And towards the top are the ones that have the most meat in them, or are the most relevant. And if you look here, it has this little piece that says explore in depth. Hold on. Here it is. There. And you can see this one says it has 2,990 more articles. So look at this, because if you're searching for some other current news item, and like the snowstorms, for example, or something related to the snowstorms, you're searching for them, don't just stop at what you see here. If you click on Explore in Depth, it's going to bring you up to a page that's got so many different news stories that are all about that same topic, and you can scan through these and look for one that meets your needs much easier. So that's another trick to help you. Hint, hint. Please remember that in the very near future. Okay, so just for the sake of humor, something that I find very interesting and amusing is that the media in the last day or two have started buzzing that John Williams should take over Brian Williams' job, which I think is kind of funny. Brian Williams, interestingly enough, has risen to the surface, especially of the millennial generation and below, as an actual news source. And it's interesting because he's really not a news source. He's actually in the entertainment side of the house, but his show has evolved over time to be so much about the news and to be so current event specific that a lot of people, when they're polled in surveys, about news. A lot of people will say that they get their news from Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert, and now, of course, both of them are stepping down, so I don't know what that's going to do to the millennial generation who turn to those two for their news. They're going to find a new source. But so I find it very funny. This is the Washington Post. This is not just some random blogger in Missouri, you know. Jon Stewart replacing BrianWilliams. So, you know, we'll see. I don't think that's ever going to happen, but other things have happened that have been interesting. I personally like Lester is the person that's filling in for him now, and he's great. He's just terrific. So I'm scrolling down to find, here we go. I wanted to show you this as well. And see, for those of you who watched Broadcast News a couple weeks ago as your movie, look at this. See what you think of this. BrianWilliams, the funniest guy in the room, Esquire, saying in 2005, "What do you call a former fireman from New Jersey with a surprisingly quirky wit and no college degree? Anchorman. But this anchor had gifts of showmanship more than any other major anchor of the modern era. He could make them laugh. This ability arguably brought him more celebrity than even his best journalism." So if you watch The Anchorman, that's the criticism that's leveled at one of the characters, is that he's all show and there's no substance beneath him, and he didn't finish his college degree. He was serving in sports journalism and then got hired by one of the mainstream broadcast news organizations to be their anchor, or one of their reporters first and then the anchor. So I just thought that when I saw this article, I was like, oh, look at that. It could be a line directly out of broadcast news. Okay, and then the last thing I wanted to show you is this sentence that I pulled from one of the articles. The people who described the events at the network over the last 7 days spoke strictly on the condition of anonymity. You may want to remember those terms, spoke on the condition of anonymity, because they are going to come into play pretty soon in the next few weeks in our class, and you're going to need to be making use of search terms such as spoke on the condition of anonymity in order to do some assignments. So you might want to write that down. Okay, so that's it. That's my takedown and rundown and delve into all things BrianWilliams. If you have any questions or want to chat about this, just let me know. And stay warm with the Arctic freeze that's coming through.